Welcome, one more night, to Mysteria. Today, we delve into one of the most notorious and painful judicial errors in Spain's criminal history. A case that shocked an entire country, and whose truth took far too long to be revealed. We speak of the Wanninkhof case. The story of Rocío, of Dolores, and of how the thirst for justice can blind one to the truth. The night of the disappearance. We are in Mijas, a beautiful municipality on the Costa del Sol, in the province of Malaga. The year is 1999. It is an area of quiet life, sun, and tourism. Rocío Wanninkhof Hornos is a young woman of 19. She lives with her mother, Alicia Hornos, and her two siblings. Rocío is described as a vital, sociable girl with plans for the future. The night of October 9, 1999, is a local holiday in Mijas. There are fairs. Rocío has plans to meet her boyfriend, Jorge. Around 10:30 p.m., Rocío leaves her house, in the La Cala de Mijas urbanization. The house is near the Wenguerola Road, the A7. She goes on foot, walking about 500 meters to the bus stop that will take her to the Wenguerola fair. Rocío never reaches that stop. In fact, she never reaches her destination. The last people to see her alive are a couple, who claim to have seen her cross an underpass next to the highway, heading toward the bus. After that, silence. Jorge, her boyfriend, waits for her in vain. Alicia Hornos, the mother, is not immediately worried. She is a young girl. It is a holiday. It is normal for her to be late. But as the hours pass, and Rocío gives no sign of life, the concern turns into panic. The next morning, October 10, the family reports her disappearance. Spain's civil guard begins the search. The area is extensive, with much vegetation and many housing developments. Initially, the possibility of a voluntary runaway is considered, although the family categorically dismisses it. Rocío would not leave without warning. 5 days after the disappearance, on October 14, the first clue is found. A resident of the area, near the Ángel de Miraflores development, just a few meters from where Rocío was last seen, discovers something. It is Rocío's athletic shoes, a white tank top, and her bra. They are folded, discarded on an embankment next to a forest track. There are no signs of a struggle. There is no blood. This finding rules out a runaway, and confirms the worst fears. Something serious has happened to Rocío. The investigation focuses from this moment on the hypothesis of a kidnapping, or a violent crime. The search intensifies. Hundreds of volunteers comb the area. Media pressure begins to grow, though still incipient. On November 2, 1999, 24 days after the disappearance, the tragedy is confirmed. Sanitation workers operating near the Altos del Rodeo development, 25 kilometers from where the clothes were found, discover a body. The body is in an advanced state of decomposition. It is Rocío Wanninkhof. The autopsy reveals that the young woman was stabbed 9 times, with brutal precision, especially in the back and chest. The cause of death was massive hemorrhage, caused by the wounds. The murder weapon is not found. The initial crime scene, where the clothes were found, and the location of the body's discovery, are separated by a great distance. This suggests that the killer or killers disposed of the body after the crime, and attempted to conceal the evidence. Spain's civil guard now has a murder, but they do not have a suspect. The theory of the crime of passion in Dolores Vázquez. The investigation stalls for months. Multiple hypotheses are considered: a botched robbery, a serial killer, a settling of scores. But the brutality and lack of motive steer investigators toward a crime of a personal nature. This is where a key figure enters the scene: Dolores Vázquez. Dolores Vázquez, or Loli, as she was known, was the former partner of Rocío's mother, Alicia Hornos. Their relationship had ended a few years earlier, but Loli maintained a close bond with the family, and had lived with them. She was, in fact, an almost maternal figure to Rocío. As the year 2000 progresses, media pressure on the case is unbearable. Public opinion demands results. Rocío's family, especially Alicia Hornos, subtly begins to direct attention toward Dolores Vázquez. The argument was simple, and based on Dolores' personality. Loli was a strong-willed, independent woman, whose demeanor contrasted with the traditional standards of the time and place. Her appearance, her attitude, her lack of effusiveness in public, were viewed as cold or calculating. Spain's civil guard begins to focus on Dolores Vázquez. The motive articulated is revenge, a revenge directed toward Alicia Hornos, using her daughter Rocío as an instrument. And what evidence was there against Dolores Vázquez? Practically none. The accusation is based on a series of weak circumstantial indications and social prejudice. The most important of these indications was the testimony of a neighbor, who claimed to have seen a vehicle similar to Dolores Vázquez's near the scene of the disappearance. However, the description of the vehicle was vague, and the neighbor changed her story several times. Another key factor was Dolores' attitude during interviews. Her calmness, her rationality, were interpreted by investigators and the media as a mask to conceal her guilt. Her sexual orientation also played a role in the climate of suspicion. On September 7, 2000, almost a year after the crime, Dolores Vázquez is arrested. The media pounces on the case with unprecedented ferocity. Before the trial is held, public opinion has already delivered a verdict. Dolores Vázquez is, for most, the Mijas killer. The social and media pressure on the court was palpable, even before the popular jury was seated. The trial and the conviction. The trial against Dolores Vázquez begins in 2001, at the Provincial Court of Malaga. The prosecution and the private prosecution, represented by the Hornos family, build a purely circumstantial case. There is no weapon, there is no confession, and most importantly, there is no DNA linking her to Rocío or the crime scene. The central element of the accusation is the famous crime of passion, arguing that Dolores Vázquez, jealous and resentful over the end of her relationship with Alicia, planned a methodical murder to cause maximum pain. Dolores Vázquez's defense fights against the tide, emphasizing the absolute lack of material evidence. The jury, however, is exposed to the intense media campaign that has prejudged the accused. The verdict arrives on September 25, 2001. The popular jury unanimously declares Dolores Vázquez guilty of murder. The sentence is handed down shortly thereafter, 15 years in prison, for the murder of Rocío Wanninkhof. Dolores Vázquez, always maintaining her innocence, enters prison. Her conviction is an example of how prejudice, demeanor, and appearance can outweigh forensic evidence in a popular jury system. Appeals filed by the defense are rejected. The case is closed. Justice has been served, or so the country believed. The second crime and the unexpected twist. The story of Rocío Wanninkhof seemed to have ended with Dolores Vázquez's conviction, but justice, sometimes, writes unexpected scripts. 2 years later, on August 14, 2003, tragedy strikes the Costa del Sol again, just a few kilometers from Mijas. Sonia Carabantes, a 17-year-old girl from the neighboring town of Coin, disappears after attending the local fair. Her body is found 5 days later, on August 19, in an open field on the outskirts of Coin. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered by strangulation. The shock is immediate. 2 young women, 2 crimes in the same area, with a pattern of extreme violence. Spain's civil guard and the national police launch a joint investigation. During the autopsy of Sonia Carabantes' body, forensic experts find a biological sample, DNA, an unknown male genetic profile, presumably belonging to the killer. This is where the twist occurs that would shatter the Mijas verdict. The police, as a matter of routine, decide to cross-reference this DNA profile with samples stored in the unsolved cases file. And the match occurs. The genetic profile of that unknown man matches a DNA sample found in the area where Rocío Wanninkhof's belongings were discovered in 1999. A pubic hair, found near Rocío's clothing, which at the time was not considered conclusive, contained the same genetic code as the semen found on Sonia Carabanti's body. This meant one of two things. Either Dolores Vázquez had an accomplice with the same DNA, or Dolores Vázquez was innocent, and Rocío Wanninkhof's killer was the same man who had just killed Sonia Carabantes. The conclusion was devastating for the judicial system. Dolores Vázquez was in prison for a crime she did not commit. The capture of Tony King. The investigation focuses immediately on tracing this genetic profile. One of the largest police operations in Spain's recent history is launched. The key to success lies in international collaboration. The DNA is cross-referenced with databases in other countries, especially the United Kingdom, as the Costa del Sol has a significant British community. The DNA turns out to be that of a British citizen, Robert Graham, also known as Tony Alexander King. Tony King was a British ex-convict, with a history of sexual offences and assaults in his home country. He had arrived in Spain, supposedly seeking a new start, but in reality, he had continued his criminal pattern. On September 7, 2003, exactly 3 years after Dolores Vázquez's arrest, Tony King is apprehended in the municipality of Alhaurín el Grande. The man, cornered by the DNA evidence, confesses quickly to the murder of Sonia Carabantes, but when questioned about the Rocío Wanninkhof crime, he denies it. Nevertheless, the pressure of the scientific evidence, and the irrefutable connection of the pubic hair, are too strong. Tony King eventually confesses his participation in Rocío's death. His version of events is that he had no intention of killing Rocío. He claims he accosted her on the way to the bus stop, and that after a struggle, he stabbed her in an act of panic. Tony King's confession, and the DNA evidence, mean only one thing for Dolores Vázquez: the exoneration and the price of justice. On September 2, 2003, with Tony King's confession and DNA in hand, the High Court of Justice of Andalusia annuls the sentence against Dolores Vázquez. Dolores Vázquez is released, after spending 519 days in prison, almost a year and a half of her life stolen by a monumental judicial error. Upon leaving jail, Dolores Vázquez found herself faced with a country that had transitioned from seeing her as the monstrous killer to seeing her as the victim of an atrocious mistake. However, the exoneration was not the end of her ordeal. The social stigma, the destruction of her reputation, and the psychological damage were irreparable. Tony King's trial, for its part, focused on the scientific evidence. He was found guilty of the murder of Sonia Carabantes and the rape and murder of Rocío Wanninkhof. In separate trials, he was sentenced to a total of 36 years in prison. The Wanninkhof case exposed serious deficiencies in the initial investigation. The lack of police rigor, the excessive reliance on circumstantial evidence, and the tremendous influence of the press on the jury were determining factors in the conviction of an innocent person. Rocío's family, although relieved to know who the real killer was, had to face the painful truth that they had actively participated in the conviction of an innocent person. Final reflection. The Wanninkhof case is a somber reminder that the presumption of innocence is the pillar of a state of law. The story of Rocío and Sonia reminds us of the horror of crime, but the story of Dolores Vázquez reminds us of the horror of error and the danger of prejudice. DNA, the biological fingerprint, was the only silent and irrefutable witness that could unmask the true culprit and restore freedom to the wrongfully convicted person. Dolores Vázquez has always maintained that justice was never fully repaired. The years she spent in prison, and the media lynching, are a wound that will never close. The Wanninkhof case is not just true crime, it is a lesson in how we seek monsters, and sometimes, we create them. And with this, we close the file for today. Thank you for joining us on Mysteria. We will see you in the next case. 002 The Wanninkhof Case, Spain's greatest judicial error. If you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, activate the little bell, and give it a like. This way, you will help more people discover the story behind every mystery. Don't miss the next episode of Mysteria. Córdoba, 2011. A father takes his 2 children to spend an afternoon playing. Hours later, they vanish without a trace. What began as a desperate search transformed into one of the toughest and most chilling trials in Spain's recent history. Lies, fire, and silence. A triangle that concealed the truth for months. Mysteria the Breton Case. When love turns into vengeance, not even justice finds solace.